Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and what I'm going to talk about, at least in this particular segment, is toxic people. Who they are, how they show up in your life, what to do with them, and something else is how not to pick up their bad habits. Because once we discover something like this is in our life, and it usually happens because there's some sort of crisis around toxic people that makes them show up, and then it becomes apparent. It's because they've been around. They've done something that has upset some peace that we have in our lives, and it's what to do. Because oftentimes toxic people are the very people that you love, and it's hard to divorce yourself from these specific individuals. Well, you do have to find some way to insulate yourself from them, and it's not always the easiest thing to do because you have to begin to have that sort of self-talk. Okay, what's this about? Because quite often, one of the things that toxic people are able to do, because they can be so convincing, is they can convince you that it's your problem and not theirs. So you wind up taking on things that don't necessarily belong to you. In episode 26, I talked about self-love. And, these things sort of come together. Now, this is episode 27, talking about toxic people. But what happens is when these people are so integral to your life, then you feel intertwined with this, and it is such a mess. It's how do we get ourselves out of these situations? Well, the first thing to do is you really have to be in your own space and look at the problem for what it is. And that could be incredibly difficult because toxic people can sense you pulling away from them. So one of the things you have to do is you have to find your own space so that you can think for yourself. You cannot allow them to be part of the process, because invariably what they do is they sense you pulling away from them. And for that, they're not going to let you go. You're in their clutches. So again, finding your own space so that you can think clearly and begin to unravel the problem. And as it is with any of these things, you may find that very difficult to do. Learning to find your own space, seeking your own center, that's something to do with establishing boundaries. In anywhere, if you got to go to a library, sit in the car, find a quiet space in the house, find your own time. And if you're a person that keeps a journal, you could probably find in your journal the documentation. If some people really like to do that, find that history in yourself, and you can see when things would change when you're around this particular individual, whoever the toxic person is. And by being able to actually define it, that you might actually be able to point that there is an individual in your life that you can kind of attribute some of this responsibility to, then you can begin to separate yourself. And you need to find other things to do than to be their caretaker. That's for sure. Start looking out for your own best interest. And when you have toxic people in your life, this is something you have to do. Now, what the other things that toxic people bring, they not only bring you trouble, but they bring their troubles with you. And if they're into they're drinking or spending money too much, spending your money, your resources, whatever, and they're bringing this to your life, you have to separate yourself from them. And this is just a matter of your own survival, and learn it from that standpoint. Now, this is not selfish. This is not selfish of you in a bad way to want to survive this kind of thing. You have to divorce yourself from it, because those that you love or whatever future you may want to have really depends upon you being able to not only establish your boundaries, but being able to separate yourself when you have situations like this happen. I mean, you can't just hope that they're just going to one day die and they're going to leave. Toxic people just show up all the time. So you would have this endless series of situations to have to deal with. So it's about establishing some boundaries. It's about being able to find your own space and then being able to develop your own voice to be able to learn to say no. Give yourself permission to say no. You have to. This is a survival skill. This is almost as important as breathing oxygen, because without that, you're going to be constantly dealing with the drama of what toxic people bring to you. And it doesn't matter what the situation is, like whether it's the drugs, whether it's the money thing, whether it's the arguments in the relationship, and so on and so forth. Now, some of these things, when you're intertwined, if this is a marriage, you have got a big undertaking, because it is very difficult to divorce yourself from somebody when you become so dependent upon them for your survival and possibly your livelihood, your emotional needs and so on and so forth, because you've invested a lot in that. You don't necessarily want to end that kind of situation, but that requires a referee. Therefore, a counselor, somebody who can be a lot more objective. And whether it's a pastor, whether it's someone you hire as a counselor, somebody who's a professional in being able to deal with conflict. Because invariably, when these situations start to change, there's going to be conflict. Because that's just the nature of it. Because toxic people, again, they are good at what they do. They have grown to be able to find people who are vulnerable, who they can get their resources from, whatever the resources are, and exploiting those situations. And it's usually the emotional part that does us the most damage. I mean, money, we can, if you're a person who's able to manifest you work, you have money coming in, you could easily replace that for yourself. But it's the emotional thing that happens when you're around toxic people that seem to have the most damage, because that reverberates all over the place. It happens not only just when the toxic person is around you, but it's when they're gone and you're dealing with the guilt, or maybe the other situations that you find yourself in, the other encounters, and you're having these this toxic baggage just follow you all over the place. So you're reacting to things because of these toxic people. And it's good for you to recognize these episodes when they happen, because then you realize, hey, I only have to fix this one thing. It could be a big thing, but I've only got to fix this one thing and make things better for me. So I've given you a few things to notice. If you're having reverberations in other places in your life, then you obviously want to find what's the source of that. And sometimes it's the stress and strife that somebody is bringing to you. That's a toxic person, because problem solving in and of itself requires some sort of skill, and it's in the place of when it's with another individual, it's being able to sit down and dialogue things. And toxic people don't tend to want to let you have a say in it. They tend to want to dictate all the terms and conditions. And if you're dealing with people like that, then you have to divorce yourself from them. You have to separate yourself from that situation and say, they're not looking out for your best interests. They're not trying to work this as a team, and that it's two people having to do the work. And that's another trait of toxic people. They want somebody else to do all the work, or at least to do all the heavy lifting, and they want to be able to ride and coast on your coattails. That's expensive, not only financially, but emotionally, because you always find yourself having to do more and more and more and more. And if you could see this, that any of this resonates with you, you're probably dealing with toxic people. Now, one of the other things that I mentioned is about picking up their bad habits. They can leave you in such a bad mood that you don't even recognize the fact that you're in a bad mood. And some of it is just the idea that you're repeating the things that they're doing to you. And that's what I talked about earlier when I said about the reverberations this sort of stuff has, and why it's insidious in nature. I mean, it just sort of creeps in, and sometimes it's in the reaction of other people to you that you realize that, wow, you're behaving in a way that's irrational, and these kinds of things repeat themselves over and over. when you have people that you trust in your life to give you honest feedback, and I mean honest, I'm not just talking about positive feedback, but I mean honest feedback, who can share with you, hey, I see things changing here. It would do you well to be able to hear the message that they're trying to send to you, and maybe find what it is in your life that's happening so that you can work on that and make yourself a priority to change that. So those are my tips. And I hope that helps you begin to get some insight into toxic people, how they affect you, and how to separate yourself from them. And I'll be right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. In the last segment, I was speaking specifically of toxic people, and that is how they become part of your life, how to recognize things, how to separate yourself from them. And in this segment, I want to talk just something about people that we love, how to recognize them, how to appreciate them. Now, we have all sorts of rituals. During Valentine's Day, we give cards, we give candy, we profess love. There's birthdays throughout the year. We have anniversaries. We give trophies to people that are winners, all sorts of things. But the idea is really to acknowledge them on a personal level. And with those other things, those are great. But I'm saying, like, taking the moment now. Oftentimes with those rituals, we wait for a specific day, a birthday, an anniversary, the end of the season to give a trophy or something like that. But it's about taking the moment, seizing the moment now, and sharing with someone that they are important to you, how special that is. Because you can scarcely imagine how often a moment like that of your time really makes a difference in someone else's day. In the business of being a customer service representative, you can imagine how you deal with a lot of complaints. Because why do people call? People call because they want something. And sometimes the wanting something isn't just that, hey, I want something. It's, hey, I want you to fix something. And when you're dealing with the onslaught, when you're the person who's taking those phone calls and dealing with the stress of problem solving, have you ever thought maybe of making a phone call to someone and saying, hey, you know what? I appreciate the job that you do. Thank you. Maybe to the mailman or to the grocery store clerk. And most often, people that we see in our everyday life, such as our loved ones. And it's oftentimes it's a given. We presume that they know we love them because, well, I'm here, aren't I? Well, it's about getting out of that sort of mindset, which just seems to be automatic, and it is supposed to imply that we care just because we are there. I think the words are important, and here's why. Because the implication has everything to do with how we want them to perceive our being. Okay, that sounds like a lot of words. If someone else is going through something, they're not going to necessarily see what you want them to see. So if you want them to see that how you feel about them, that you think that they're important, you got to tell them. You've got to reorient their thinking. Because if that person thinks it and they've had a bad day, everything's going to be coming through that filter. And just you showing up is not a demonstration of love necessarily. So it's about reestablishing that and saying, hey, you know what? I love you. Thank you for being who you are. And you can hardly imagine how often, if that were to happen, how much better things would be. Because then they begin to hear your voice in their head telling them how valuable they are. And that sticks with a person. And these are things that live throughout a person's life. Because, we are bombarded with a lot of negative things. And it's often things that are beyond our control. And for what it is, I know that we care and we would like to be able to do things, but it oftentimes becomes so overwhelming, we don't have all the answers. So to be able to be a reflection in someone's life as to that voice of love, that reasoning, that caring, matters all the difference in the world. So take today and tell somebody you love them. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Here's a topic that I'm going to try to cover in a very delicate way, and it is stepchildren or half-siblings. And if you are a child or a half-sibling or you're part of a blended family, let's say, there are some unique challenges as to loving and being a cohesive unit with the children. And if you are a child of a parent who has gone to another relationship and they've had kids in the new relationship, then you don't necessarily have to have the age, someone of a similar age as you and dealing with the competition in that regard. But, the children would say be younger. But if your parent happens to marry a person who has children or of a similar age, see, now you have some of the other sibling rivalry kinds of things. And, these all present very unique challenges to deal with. And if you're in that situation, we're going to talk about that a little bit. And also, what some of the unique challenges are of blended families, and not only for the children, but for the parents who have to make the decision about whether a blended family even works. And I'm going to talk about that right after this.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and I'm going to talk about stepchildren, blended families, and some of the challenges that are unique to that. To begin with, and I'm going to talk about this from the parents' aspect, to people who have children, and you meet another person who has children, and you find that you have a great chemistry and you'd like to carry the relationship forward. Well, obviously, there's always the consideration of those who you're responsible for. That if you're a single parent, you have your children that you care for. And then carrying that relationship forward, it's in being able to find a partner who understands and accepts the responsibility of bringing kids into that relationship. There's unique situations. You have children that could be of a very similar age, which there can certainly be a competition for attention in that regard. And then there's the situation in which when kids are you blended the family and you have different ages. And I also had, in talking about it before the break, I mentioned that there's also the possibility that when two people get together and then there's new children that are added to the family. So there's not necessarily the competition for the similar age, but it's about the younger children coming up and so on. So all of these present very unique challenges. And the thing about this is I'm going to speak to the parents of, when you're considering that sort of thing, these are some of those aspects of blended families that are very unique. And but typical to that experience. When you have children of your own and you're bringing them into the world, you're dealing with them on a one-on-one basis. There's that sort of ownership because they're your kids. But when you're dealing with the children of your partner, then there's a unique set of challenges because it's how comfortable do the children feel with being in your presence or about you parenting them. And then there's an added element of the biological parent, the one who's not in the household, but that other biological parent having influence on the kids as well. And all of these can create quite a disturbance when it doesn't work well. And there's lots of opportunities for this thing to get derailed. Counselors who deal with marriage, family, and children are uniquely trained to handle some of these. And I certainly suggest that if you're running into any of these problems, that they are a good resource. There are plenty of books out there. I don't necessarily have one to recommend at this point, but I could suggest that you go to a bookstore, go to a library, look online, and look for books that deal with blended families or stepchildren. And addressing this kind of thing is certainly a lot to take on, but you do it for love. And helping children feel comfortable in your space, in your presence, is obviously part of the long-term plan. And remember that you do have a responsibility to your partner to be the best partner you can be, not only to your new love, but also to the children that come about. And when you go through this with your eyes open, then you're much better prepared to deal with some of the challenges that come about. Now, a lot of these things will be very typical, especially when it comes to sibling rivalry. There'll be kids, they will have their own experience about how they want attention. Each child has their own personality, and you'll learn to develop the love and experience that in trying to make things work. But there's also the part here, now I want to speak to the children of this because my audience is fairly broad. If you are a child going through this experience, there may be a bit of upheaval because you are now introducing people into your life. If it's just simply the partner is a single person and not bringing children into it, it's an easier stretch. But if they're going to bring children into the experience, meaning people that are going to be of your similar age, then you're going to have a unique set of challenges. You're going to have to experience love and give love in a way that you probably weren't expecting to. And that's a stretch because we're not generally programmed to do that. I mean, you've probably gone through enough experiencing your mom or dad separate, and now to have them experience bringing a new person into your life and what change that's going to present to you, and it's going to be a very unique set of changes. It's going to be emotional. And hopefully it's a good experience, because for you, in order to have a good life, you'd like to also have good role models and to not want to have to stress through this too much. And if you're a child that's going through puberty, well, you've got your own set of emotional things that's happening to you, and then to have to face dealing with other young people of similar age coming into your experience, that's trouble. So you see, there's a whole umbrella of things, and this is why, with the short half-hour broadcast of my show, I can't cover all of these things, but the thing that I want to give you an idea is that there's counselors that'll help you with this. There is plenty of material to read on how to shape this experience and make it a better one for you. Obviously, these things are challenges, and the nature of it is you're put in the situation, so you have to deal with it somehow. I think the philosophy is to make the best of it, and you might find that you have the opportunity to meet wonderful people, and it's incumbent upon the parents to help that be a good experience. But you, as a child who's facing this, you also have a responsibility to be the best person you can be and learning to communicate. If you're a particularly shy person, it might be a real big challenge for you, because you might have to come out of your shell and verbalize your feelings. And maybe the new person coming into your life, the new sibling, could be a wonderful partner, a wonderful friend. And wouldn't that be a nice thing to look forward to? And if you're a parent, again, talking to the parents parts here, keep an eye out for this. Look for opportunities to make it a working a win-win situation for the kids, because obviously they don't necessarily have a choice in the matter. And for what it is to them to be put into a situation where they have no experience, no training to deal with, it could be a little bit gut-wrenching. Because I think the thing that happens to kids is they feel like they're going to fall through the cracks, that they're not going to get the love and the attention, and that when that happens, they're going to wonder, okay, who can I turn to? Because their parents are the ones that they have come to depend on. Now, speaking back to the kids, when you're facing these kinds of things, try to create a working space so that you can talk to your parents, so that you can share with them what's going on for you. And by doing so, you can help head off problems, and you get to be cause in the matter, because sometimes it puts you in a place of having responsibilities that you didn't necessarily expect. But hey, that helps you grow as well. That helps you develop independence. And there's a lot that you can learn in situations. You learn that people, when things don't necessarily go as planned, but there's an adjustment, that, hey, that can work out too. And the nice thing about for the grown-ups in this situation is you have developed a partnership with somebody who you love and trust, and that can help you raise your children and to grow up to be productive and in society and make you proud. And that's a wonderful thing. And remember that. That's also one of the responsibilities you have coming into this relationship. You have it to not only yourself, but to the children and any new children that you bring into this world. So, you might find yourself looking for opportunities in order to make the blended family thing work. I find that church organizations are because they're family oriented, love the idea of being able to take the family unit and do things together. That's such a wonderful place to be, because they encourage the embracing of the family unit and learning to depend on that. So that's a wonderful outlet. If you have family reunions, that's another place where the people can get together and get to meet each other and get to know each other and share love. And with those kinds of things to look forward to, remember, these are wonderful things to look forward to in life. But with those kinds of things to look forward to, you have a life that's blossoming. And to the young people that are experiencing this, the family reunion thing, hey, it may be great because you have not only one side of the family, but then there's your parents' new partner. There's other places that you get to go, you get to see, and lots of other people to get to meet. And, that could be a wonderful thing. I try to see the positives in these, because that's what's to look forward to. And to see it as a negative is very defeating. It only drags you down. And there are lots of things in life that we have no control over, but there are things that we make the best of them. And this is one of those things that obviously it can be a challenge. There are challenges in life anyway, whether they were your biological siblings or not. There are challenges. And sometimes meeting new people, they can be great examples. And your parent, them having a partner that they can rely on, that could be a good role model for you. So it might be good to be able to look up to that person and share some love and be nice and give a Mother's Day or a Father's Day card or celebrate another birthday or something like that. You see, there's all kinds of things we can do with that. And to share a little bit of my own experience, I had a half brother, and we went to elementary school together. He was a year behind me, so it was really interesting that we got to go to school together. I mean, he introduced me to television shows that I never thought of that I'd watch, and he was a very creative, artistic person, which was not my thing. I was more into being a musician and playing baseball, and he wasn't. But he was one of the more creative people that I'd ever met, and he went on to do some wonderful things in that area. So I was very proud to have known him and to experience it in that way. And we had our sibling rivalries, but we worked it out. And the nice thing is my mother loved him as her own, and that again was an example for me about how to be. So that's a little bit of my own experience around that. I'm John Johnson, and you're listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Thank you, and join me next time.